Patagonia knows that 97% of our environmental impact is in materials, is in the materials that go into the clothes. Good to know. But it doesn't mean that that's the only thing we pay attention to, because it's 97% of our impact. In dealing with the world as it is, we have to go back, I think, more toward a kind of traditional matriarchal attitude toward managing things rather than patriarchal. You know, the mother, you don't stop cooking dinner because the kid is crying, and you don't ignore the kid crying because you're making dinner. You deal with what comes up in front of you. You take a look at the whole, and that's what we've abandoned in so many places in an industrial culture.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Linley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture, all without toxic chemicals. You just heard from Vincent Stanley, author of The Responsible Company, What We've Learned from Patagonia's First 40 Years. Vincent wrote this book along with his uncle, Patagonia's founder, Yvon Chouinard. He sat down with Dave to talk more about how they've adapted their shared philosophies amid Earth's big planetary changes and an increasing awareness that business will play a major role for better or for worse.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast, and I'm pleased to be talking with Vincent Stanley today. Vincent, so good to see you. This is the first time we've actually met in the real world.
No, it's really wonderful.
It's been virtual. Yeah. So, yeah, great.
And it's a great place to meet, too.
Oh, it's a beautiful farm. I got the tour yesterday and ate my way around the place. Yeah, carrots and cabbage and lots of good stuff. This is my favorite farm.
Yeah, mine too. I live much of the year just up the road, and this is where we come on Saturday morning when it's open.
Yeah, I envy you that.
Yeah, that's great.
It is great. So we've had several conversations over the years, and they've always been interesting. And I'm sure we'll touch some of the same points, but I'd like to revisit a few things. Let's just talk about the future of the Responsible Company, which just came out recently, and it's a redo of a book that you did 10 years ago.
Yeah, 10 or 11. Yeah.
So why did you feel the need to make out a second edition with a slightly different title?
I think there's sort of two reasons. One is the changes in the world and the changes within the company. So the world is a very different place than it was in 2011 when we were in the process of writing the first book. And I think to some extent we've almost been whipsawed by events. You had certain positive events in the mid 2010s, including 183 nations signing on to Sustainable Development Goals, agreeing what does a healthy economy look like in all places. It wasn't just like, okay, this is the prescription that the developed world is going to describe for people who countries that have less money. And then you had an interesting papal encyclical from Francis called Laudato Si on Care for Our Common Home, which he said, it looks like we have two crises, one social, one environmental, but it's really one crisis with two faces. And when we're talking about the poor, the poorest of all is Mother Earth at this point. And we had the Paris Accords, which were hard fought and long coming. And then following that, we had some counter events. We had the election, most prominently the election of Donald Trump. So what we've seen in the larger world is, on the one hand, glimmerings of a kind of broad agreement on where the world needs to go if we're going to save both nature and ourselves, and we're a part of nature. And then on the other hand, a kind of reaction to be expected. But we've also seen, as a company, we've seen more people come our way. We've seen more people say, okay, Patagonia is really providing an interesting example of how to behave in the world. We've seen the advance of, not without challenge, of smallholder organic farming and the rise of local farmers markets. A little bit of a rise, we need far more of it, of a sense of place, of, saying, okay, this is what we've got a globalism, great, we've got computers, we've got instant communication with each other all day long. But what we've lost in a lot of places in the world is the sense that you can affect your fate as a community, as a group of people in a particular place, and honoring and helping to keep alive the local river, the local forest, all of the things that make up an ecosystem that underlie all of our social and industrial activities. The other thing I think that was big for Patagonia is actually to get into the food business in a small way with Patagonia Provisions. And so, for the past 30 years, as a clothing company, we are a global business. We have a very deep supply chain. We don't make anything. And everything that we've done, like switching to organic cotton, or removing neoprene from wetsuits, or taking back products at the end of their life, all of these things are basically reducing the harm we do. None of these are actually giving back more to the planet or more to human communities than we're taking. But the food business, when you're dealing with soil and you've got the possibility to actually create topsoil much faster than nature can, you have this sense of actually giving back. And it also gave us the sense of regenerative in the true meaning of the term, which is that you're no longer extractive. You are returning to nature what you take from her. But the other thing is, as a business model, when we looked at Patagonia Provisions, we said, okay, as we develop this business, we're going to take an interesting position into what becomes a Patagonia Provisions product. We said everything that we introduce has to solve a problem in the food system or solve a problem in agriculture. That's the model, not what's hot in the market, where the hole is from what the competitors make. And I think that that's, in a way, it's a North Star for Patagonia as a whole, because I think this is the best possible use of business, is to actually make products in a kind of self-sustaining way financially that can actually help solve the tremendous environmental and social problems we have. So the world is a different place, and I think one of the things we wanted to do, we added a chapter toward the end called Making a Living in the Anthropocene. I've worked with young people in a number of colleges, but specifically with graduate students at Yale, between the business and the environmental schools and the divinity school. And we wanted to talk about, okay, how, if we're going to develop an economy in service to Mother Earth and to human communities, what are the opportunities? Where should we be putting in our energy? So that also became a part of the book, and the reason for the change of the title, that we're talking not just the kind of accounting for how Patagonia got to where it is today, but where the company might be directed in the future, given the change in mission statement to we're in business to save our home planet, and also the change in ownership structure that we did last year.
Okay, well, there's quite a lot there. So it's such a bold mission. If it's a serious mission, then it's a very bold mission to say we're in business to save the mother planet.
Yeah.
Right. The home planet. Because I think that virtually all business is in fact fairly indifferent to that.
Yeah. Or antithetical.
Or even, although I would guess that most businesses that are highly destructive aren't being that way because they intend destruction.
No, absolutely.
They just intend to make money.
Yeah, and they intend to do what they learned how to do. I often go back to this. I love this Aldo Leopold quote, which is kind of the basic of the land ethic. And he says, a thing is right when it tends to support the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community, which includes us as a part of that. But then when you think about business, to your point, this is not just like people sitting down determining to be evil. Everything we do in business disrupts the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community. So it's a huge job to shift away from that, and to think about that in terms of our politics, our business, and our community, our civic activity. It's big to shift away from that, but when you start to look at it in the way of, in terms of that land ethic, I think it grounds you in the sense of, okay, that's a good start. That's where we need to go from.
It sounds wonderful. Do you think that, the amazing thing is to take it to business?
Yeah.
That is normally the province of, crazy loners and religion, that to say we're going to commit ourselves to the common good, and here, as the church did in that proclamation, they're including the common good to be the planet.
Yeah.
The whole ecosystem, not just the human social system. So to say, well, we're going to take this to business, I have so many questions there, but the first one is, Patagonia remains profitable while attempting to do this. Do you think that there are places where you're forced to go, well, we can't do that because we'd lose money, even though we think we should?
Yes. But there are several questions involved in that. The first is, there's a kind of basic business responsibility to pay your bills and have enough money to pay your workers and pay the social insurance tax and all that. I think even for Patagonia 15 or 20 years ago, we would have looked at, okay, we do certain things to make money, and we do certain things that we think are right, and it kind of balances out, and we're doing okay. I think one of the things that's changed over the past 15 years is this accumulation of experience, that the more we tackle one problem, okay, we're going to switch to organic cotton. Well, it was hugely disruptive for the company. We had to drop a third of the sportswear. We lost margin, we lost sales for the first couple of years. But we made it work, and we brought the customers along, and then that made it easier to tackle the next question. Okay, how do we get the neoprene out of wetsuits? How do we address the question of circularity? How do we take back products at the end of their life to recycle into something new? How do we address the whole problem of overconsumption or mass consumption of disposable, low-quality goods? And the more we kind of addressed that, the more experience we got, I think the more we were able to move on to do the next thing. But also what shifted is a sense, I wish we had thought of this, even going back to switching to organic cotton. If we'd had a different mind, when we did that, we were gripped. I mean, we bought the cotton directly from the farmers. We didn't know what we were doing. We broke our connection to the global supply chain. We were terrified, but we said, okay, we're going to do this. What if we'd sat down and said very calmly, this is an investment we're going to make. This is something that's going to cost the company something in the short term, but it's going to pay off. We're going to make it pay off in the long run. And I think that's an attitude we need to adopt more on the social side, especially, because that usually involves spending more money rather than saving it. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly in developing and changing the way we do business, which often requires a learning curve. I mean, I think it's famous that it takes a new farmer 7 years to basically even figure out what they're doing.
Yeah. Okay. So when you went through the things, you started with cotton, you said, well, once we got that done, and then you went to neoprene. Well, to switch to organic cotton is not a small thing. It's a huge thing.
Yeah.
And you did it for important reasons, but it was also radical. So I just want to go there for a moment and say, this is not a small thing to say we're only going to use organic cotton. It's a radical, dramatic statement. And you made that because you realized how toxic conventional cotton was.
Right.
And I see it all the time, Vincent, that here's my hat, right? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's organic. It's 70% organic cotton, 30% recycled polyester.
Right.
We hope.
Yeah.
That's what it says. We hope it's true. But my point is, most people just can't be bothered. It's extra money.
Yeah.
Why would I pay for that? I feel like a schmuck. People are still so far from appreciating how significant the difference is between conventional, which means chemical cotton, and organic. So I think your leadership made that decision first, and then you brought your team along,
right? Which
was an important story, how you did that.
Yeah.
But it hasn't been picked up by others that I'm aware of, other companies on scale.
It hasn't, and it's interesting because organic cotton was absolutely essential for our culture and for making that change successfully. But in terms of being influential, no. I mean, 1% of cotton grown is organic. And what we've seen in the intervening years is that GMO cotton took over the space that organic cotton had promised to occupy. Mm. But, the world moves in mysterious ways. So the fact that we were able to make this change inspired us to do other things that have been more influential than the move to organic cotton. Mm-hmm. So
more influential on the mass culture
that other people would pick up.
Yeah, I'm always impressed by your optimism. Because I'm like Yvon. I have a lot of pessimism, but as you say, that's not that the bias for action is much more important than the optimism and the sense of agency.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that. But when we talk about cotton, it seems like such a big deal. In all the years that we did the Real Organic Project, and before that, Keep the Soil Organic, I actually never thought about cotton. I didn't go, well, is organic cotton real?
Yeah.
I knew that organic dairy wasn't real. I knew that organic poultry wasn't real.
Yeah.
I don't mean all of it, There's
Right.
definitely real stuff, but I know that the market is dominated by what I would call fraud. And I've heard, as we all have, of a fair amount of organic fraud in India and Pakistan. So I was like, oh God, we aren't even talking about that. And I think it's so important, the difference. And the question is, how do you actually create the change? And Patagonia just chose it. Because it's privately held, somebody made a decision and said, this is what we're going to do. And it changed. And ultimately, you were able to, at very least, break even, if not reap a benefit financially. Would you say that Patagonia has earned loyalty and that customers have felt more connected to the company because of that decision?
No, I'd say that was the success of organic cotton was on the basis of attracting people with shared values to the
That's
line.
why I bought a Patagonia jacket.
Yeah.
It is.
No, and I think that's been true for a lot of people. And it also, a story I don't tell too often, but we had I do say that when we ordered from farmers in California and Texas, we broke our connection to the global supply chain because those farmers had no relationship to spinners. The spinners turned the fiber into yarn. No one would talk to us. You know, we went all around and it said, oh, we hate organic cotton. It gums up the machines. It's sticky. And the person who took us on ran one of the largest spinning mills in the world in Bangkok. And years later, we asked him, why did you even talk to us? Because you were so big and we were so small. And he said, well, I guess I'm a closet environmentalist. And I've seen this happen too, that, you know, one of the questions you asked earlier is if you, it goes back to this whole question of making change, that a lot of people will look at what they do and they'll understand that they're creating a particular harm and they won't change. And I think that one of the things that, and I would say also that it would be true at Patagonia, that there are lots of things that we look at and we say, we don't know how to change that. You know, we're dealing with the whole problem of plastics. We can make the change in using 100% recycled nylon and polyester, develop that so it doesn't lose performance. There are problems we don't know how to solve. But I think we've developed a good way to face them, to face the problem and say, okay, this is something that we know is not something that we're proud to be doing, and we're gonna keep at it, and eventually we're gonna be able to make a change. That was true with the durable water repellents that persist in the environment, PFAS. It's been true. We worked with Samsung they were the ones who sort of picked up the ball to come up with a washing machine that will filter out the microfiber waste that washing machines don't filter out. So that's an important part of it. And, you know, and even going back to the change in the mission statement, when we're talking about we're in business to save our home planet, I was kind of horrified when Yvon proposed this, because I thought, this is so aspirational, this language. This is not, we're a clothing company, you know, we're in business to sell clothes. Is this a kind of form of greenwashing? And then what I saw at the company was that the people they took it seriously. People would say, okay, what does this mean for my work? How do I change what I do? How does my team change what it does if we're trying to fulfill this aspirational mission? So that goes back to this whole sense of agency and sort of building capacity to do things that haven't been done before. It's easier to pursue the next step if you've been successful at 2 or 3 other things. And
you develop a sense of can-do based on there was something else that seemed impossible, and you did it.
That's right.
And it makes you wonder whether there's anything that's impossible. It
does. And also, but it's also in relation to something. It's like a runner wants to do better time, or, we were talking to Elliot about how long it took to climb the North American Wall in the 1950s versus people doing it solo and unprotected in a day. People, we all know that we learn individually, but also teams and groups of people and cultures learn over time. And I think we know less about that.
Yes.
We talk less about that.
Yes, I've been thinking a lot about that actually lately, because of course that's what we have to do. We can't. I'm not saying that the lonely heroic gunfighter isn't important and doesn't have their place, but ultimately, I was thinking about that movie, The Seven Samurai. Or The Magnificent Seven is the American version, and they get these 7 samurai to go to hire them to go to a little village and protect them from bandits. But of course the punchline is that in the end it's the villagers who rise up and protect themselves.
Right.
And that's how they overcome the bandits.
Yeah.
And those 7 samurai give them the courage and the inspiration to protect themselves.
Yeah. I think that's an important...
Isn't that important?
Analogy.
Yeah. So somehow we have to figure out how to get to where we, the villagers, rise up and do what needs to be done.
Yeah. I think that first burst of courage is hard to come by for a group. And in Patagonia, it was really essential that Yvon was so adamant. And, he knew it was a risk for the business, but I think he just put his foot down and said, now that I've learned how harmful conventional cotton is, I just don't want to be responsible for that. I don't have to be in the sportswear business. I can make technical clothes. But his willingness to do that, and then when people brought it about, because he wasn't the one who actually made it happen, it was all the people working for him. Then like the 7th Samurai, everybody learned that element of courage actually paid off.
Mm. Right. I was talking last night with Elliot, and there was a phrase he taught me years ago when I was very young, and I started to learn how to farm organically from him. And he called it the art of the possible.
Uh-huh.
And it was finding that one example, one farmer who was doing something that nobody had imagined. And once you see it,
yes,
it's like the 4-minute mile. Once somebody broke the 4-minute mile, now high school kids are breaking the 4-minute mile.
Right.
And but we have our mental barriers that are very real.
Right.
We go, well, we can't do that.
And we need the tangible example.
Yes.
That's why I think it's really important if and particularly when we're talking about regenerative organic, when we're talking about activities that can easily be misunderstood or co-opted by others, it's really important that we provide the experience to people who would be receptive to this, that they understand what a real regenerative organic practice is, as distinguished from the ad that's going to be, the inauthentic sounding ad that's going to be produced by Bayer or someone else.
No, I know, yes. Good, we'll talk about that in a minute. It's interesting when we were talking with Elliot before, and you said, well, organic cotton was good, but it wasn't enough.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, if we're talking about real organic, what is it that isn't enough? When we had our first board meeting, so the Real Organic Project, we started 6 years ago, and David Bronner flew to our first meeting.
Yeah.
Uninvited. From California. And he flew, and he wanted to meet us and talk.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful human being, and I was so glad that he came. And he asked, well, could we merge? And our board said, no, we don't believe in your standards. Because the standards were no-till.
Right.
And there were a couple of no-till farmers in the world who were organic.
Yeah.
And everybody was tilling and doing it carefully and doing a good job and increasing the life in their soil and increasing the organic matter.
Yeah.
I remember Emily Oakley saying, absolutely not. I don't believe in your standards.
Yeah.
She was on our board. And so, actually, regenerative organic standards have changed to be like ours now.
Yeah.
So it's great. There was a learning that happened. And so my question is, do you still think there's a different, I'm not saying it might not be useful to say, let's talk about the word regenerative because it has concepts that are important to reflect on. But I'm just curious, do you really think that there's a difference between real organic and regenerative organic?
No, but there is a difference between certified organic and regenerative organic.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why we exist too.
Yeah.
Same reason.
Yeah.
Same reason that the USDA certification is not just inadequate. It's inaccurate. It's wrong.
So what we wanted to adopt, because what we shifted to is essentially to cotton growing practices that didn't use chemicals.
Yeah.
And it's rare, actually. It's a lot of work to grow cotton with minimal tillage, companion planting, crop rotation in combination. So that's I think why we came to use the term regenerative organic was to distinguish that from certified.
Yeah, I completely respect that. You know, I'm trying to. You know, we had a whole symposium on is regenerative organic, is organic regenerative?
Yeah.
And we were seriously asking the question. Yeah. And what we know is that the word regenerative has become used by many very different players with very different intentions.
Yeah.
And what to do about that is a tough question. You can't stop it.
No,
there's no law. There's no legal definition.
But I think it becomes incumbent on us to make it clear what the practices are. You know, people always want to, and particularly in a well, I don't want to go in a rant about how much information people get and how unreliable it is, but the whole movement, I think, toward saving the home planet and also toward saving the species is toward a kind of acceptance of complexity. And going away from this idea, okay, we're going to have 3 key performance indicators, and if we hit those, we're fine, and if we don't, we're not, which is kind of laughable. I mean, it's like the difference between, I mean, you have to understand what your big problems are. Patagonia knows that 97% of our environmental impact is in the materials that go into the clothes. Good to know. But it doesn't mean that that's the only thing we pay attention to because it's 97% of our impact. In dealing with the world as it is, we have to go back, I think, more toward a kind of traditional matriarchal attitude toward managing things rather than patriarchal. You know, the mother, you don't stop cooking dinner because the kid is crying, and you don't ignore the kid crying because you're making dinner. You deal with what comes up in front of you. You take a look at the whole. And that's what we've abandoned in so many places in an industrial culture where we're you know, you had the Milton Friedman lesson for 50 years of, the sole purpose of a business is to return profits to the investor. Well, that's never been the sole purpose of a business.
No.
And it's distorted. All of these activities have gone against the Aldo Leopold idea of the integrity, stability, and beauty of the biotic community in favor of these kinds of, you know, CAFO chickens are perfect, or CAFO cattle are a perfect example of producing a kind of industrial horror that is not readily recognized because people don't make the connection. They still think of a pork chop as coming from a pig that was raised on a farm rather than one that's raised in an outdoor factory.
Yeah, well, and of course, because they're shown countless images to support that belief.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's not a mistake that they believe that, but we're in a time where the means of persuasion are getting more and more sophisticated in terms of persuading us to do what we think is the right thing, but it isn't. You know, it's greenwashing has gotten really high. Let's talk a bit about. There are two examples that you brought up before. I don't mean examples of greenwashing, but examples of complicated companies. Mm-hmm. And one was Danone, and one was Walmart. And I find them both riveting, and because I feel like I'm facing some harsh truths, and I'm trying to find what's the best way that we use our energies. And I am so impressed with what has happened at Patagonia, the path that was taken towards creating some real changes. And hopefully you become one of the 7 samurai and everybody else rises up and goes, I guess we can do it. It becomes the art of the possible. But I look at Danone and I think they were trying to do the same thing. You know, they're kind of a dessert company, really. I mean, their yogurt is pretty sweet, you know. But under Emmanuel Faber, I believe that he believed that he wanted to change their mission, and genuinely become actually regenerative. I think he didn't use that word, but I think that that's what he imagined and worked towards. And I was quite inspired by him. The guy could speak, right? And he was talking about decentralizing and localizing the food system as much as possible. And so making the food much more regional in its sourcing and distribution. These are very big aspirations for the second biggest dairy company in the world. Big multinational. And of course, when they had a couple down quarters, he was fired. And as far as I know, all of his vision was fired too. I'm sure there were some changes, residual, but I think it was really back to business as usual. I'm just curious, what do you think about that?
You know, I worried about that when Emmanuel was fired, and I had a conversation with Lorna Davis, who was really instrumental in making Danone North America a B Corp. And she had an interesting thing to say. They thought it would take 3 years after they purchased Greenwave. I think that was the name of the company they bought.
White Wave, I think.
White Wave.
Yeah, the ones that had Horizon.
I'm thinking of another operation.
Yeah.
And she said they did it in 1 year because of the devotion of the younger employees to the project, who were really inspired by it. So when Emmanuel...
They changed the culture of White Wave, you mean?
They were the ones who, instead of a B Corp certification taking 3 years, they did it in 1 year.
They did it in 1 year.
Yeah. But she said, you know, once you go down that path that Emmanuel had led the company on, it's really hard to go back entirely. What I've seen, you know, Paul Pullman was really understood what's happening in the world when he ran Unilever. And Unilever has had gone kind of back and forth since he left. What I saw with Walmart was they made these very ambitious goals in 2007, 2008 toward changing their practices, especially in terms of the energy they use and all that. And they retreated from them. But they never go away. Every second CEO that comes in reinstates something. And I think because it does become part of the culture, it does become part of the understanding. So I'm not saying that to gloss over. I'm just saying I don't think it goes away. And I'm wondering if there's a lesson that people can take from businesses and say, to start maybe looking at how to bring that back into a company that's retreated. I know from Patagonia's experience, particularly in the earlier days, we'd get people in who came from a bigger company. And we'd bring in people from a bigger company because we'd grown and we needed to change our systems and we needed somebody who understood the systems that we needed to adopt. But they'd come in and they'd say, I don't know how to function in this culture, so I'm going to rebuild it in my image. Those people were never there after a year or two. Mm-hmm. But I can see that happening with other companies too, particularly well-entrenched, larger companies, and they're going down a path and people get scared. But again, I would stress that it doesn't go away entirely. It's there like a germ within the company. Once people have had the experience of actually living out their values, being closet environmentalists or whatever, being able to bring that to work, people want to bring that back.
I think that's true. My vision of what goes on, though, is that it's ultimately not personal. And, Fred Kirschenman's famous reply to the question of, what would you do if you were Secretary of Agriculture? And he said, well, that depends on how long I wanted to be Secretary of Agriculture.
Yeah.
Because if I did what I really want to do, it would be about 10 minutes and then I'd be gone.
Well, that's a good point. And I think, I also think that it should change what our expectations are. I think it's really important for Fred Kirschenman to have done the work that he did, rather than become Secretary of Agriculture and do 10% of what he knew of what he wanted to do.
Right.
So I think that we really do need a return to the local. We need a return to the small scale. We need examples that are replicable and that also resonate with people. But I'm also, for these big guys, they can have a huge short-term effect on reducing the harm that's done.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to give them a white hat. I don't want to make ads for them. But I don't want to discourage them from going down the line as they make discoveries that reduce the harm they do or to increase the possibilities.
Well, this is the question for me. This is the question. And, so Rodale is doing a joint venture with Cargill on, I don't know, 100,000 acres, taking it organic. And you go, well, that's got to be a good thing. And, there's a lot of that kind of partnering going on with companies I would consider to be extremely bad players. And Cargill's interesting because it's still privately owned. So it has the possibility of doing what Patagonia or Bronner's have done. It's still owned by some humans and not by a public corporation with all those shareholders. But Leopold Kohr's statement, if something doesn't work, something is too big. And Elliott's been telling me that for years, but I've been thinking about it a bit more lately.
Yeah.
And I've been a bit inspired by Zephyr Teachout's book, Break 'em Up. And it is her contention, and I would say Michael Pollan is right there with her, that when you have a concentration of power and capital in a few hands, inherently it becomes anti-democratic. Inherently, it becomes destructive to our social good. And I didn't have the language for this for a long time. I mean, people could say it, but it just sounded angry. They just, they just sounded like, another thing. But I'm really seeing it so clearly now, and I'm seeing it play out right in front of my eyes. It's interesting. A monopsony is when you have a monopoly in the market space as opposed to the production space.
Yeah.
They're both happening. So Walmart is a monopsony. It's a monopoly in the marketplace. And as a result, they control how food is grown in America by the demands they put on them around what they will pay for the product. So the producers had no choice but to make it cheaper than they thought was humanly possible. We're seeing the downside of the art of the possible, making it infinitely worse over and over. And at the same time, I sent you that interesting article, they're putting money into regenerative agriculture, saying we can't be so short-sighted in our outlook. Well, they're the ones creating the outlook. Now you could say it's not their fault, they're just part of the system, but the fact is that they're a huge part of the system, and that is what's happening. They're creating a thing I would never, ever, ever sell to Walmart.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even consider it, nor would they consider it.
Yeah.
They have no way of dealing with a farm as small as I am. But that would be like putting your head in the jaws of a shark. For me, that would be very dangerous as a business. So I'm trying to make sense of this, that I'm not sure that Walmart can get it right from my perspective.
No, I don't think they can. So I think that you have to lower our expectations of what those companies can do, and at the same time, double down on what we think is the authentic version of what we're doing.
That's right.
So, community gardens, farmers markets, fighting every 7 years for a better farm bill. I mean, there are lots of things that can be done to draw people away from what you're talking about with is a real basic problem in the economy. And for the past 50 years, wages didn't increase, and the 1/3 of people who are college educated have done very well, and 2/3 have not done well, and they've been rewarded with cheap disposable goods, and food and clothing among them, and that's been a real problem for the earth, and it's a real problem for the countries in which the food is grown and the clothes are sewn. So we need to shift away from that, but it's a radical shift. And I think in order to start to make that shift, not that we all have a tremendous amount of time, is to come up with the real thing, to come up with the examples that take people away. We were talking earlier, I've just learned not to buy an organic cotton if it says an organic carrot if it says it's grown in Mexico. And not because of what I think about the conditions. I just know that carrot is not going to taste any better than the industrially grown chemical carrot. It's just, it's not the real thing. And when we look at food, I think Yvon has often said the trifecta is nutrition, taste, and soil health. And that's something that we have to offer people. And it's going to be more expensive than the Walmart carrot.
Okay, let's talk about that if we could. Yeah. There's a certain playbook of charges against, organic, and one of them is, it's for the elites.
Right.
It's too expensive. Working people can't afford it. This is usually said by people who work for elites, in my opinion.
Yes.
And it's like, Does anybody not notice, like, who's paying for this ad? But I'm just curious, that is a true thing that if something costs more, it is easily portrayed as being elitist because it is less accessible to people with limited income. And the same thing that might be said of organic food might be said of Patagonia's products. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to that?
Well, I think that almost the same thing. It's interesting for me because, Patagonia is based in Ventura. I live in Santa Barbara a lot of the time. We've had a very interesting farmers market there for a long time. I was once reaching for a tomato, and to my right was the mayor of Santa Barbara reaching for the same beautiful tomato, and to my left was Julia Child. And Julia got the tomato. But that farmer's market, I've seen the evolution of customers over the years. And it was all white people well dressed in Patagonia clothes for a long time. And now I see a lot more Hispanics. I see a lot more people who look like working people at the farmer's market. And they're there because of the quality of the food.
Yeah.
In clothing, don't get me going on fast fashion, where the average
Go for it.
item is worn 5 times and then thrown away.
Yeah.
Not even given to Goodwill like we all did when we were younger. There's no impetus, or there's no motivation to create a quality product there if it's only going to be used 5 times. So what's the difference between spending a couple $100 on a jacket that's going to last you 10 years and spending a couple $100 on 5 jackets that you're going to wear on 10 Saturday nights?
Right.
And so I think there's a mindset there. And the same with food. If you want a cheeseburger and fries and a supersized shake, well, you can get that very cheaply at any kind of fast food outlet you care for. If you want but if you want to eat well, you can also eat well for, people have demonstrated that you can't eat a lot of really good animal products, but you can eat a good diet for a fairly small amount of money, organically.
Yeah, that's right. Well, and you can eat a very bad diet inexpensively or expensively. You see somebody walking out with a big bag of Doritos. It's not really food.
No, it's not food.
But it is dealt with as food. It's what people fill themselves up on. I don't mean to sound, well, I do have strong beliefs around food and nutrition and health, and I see that a lot of food that we eat in our culture is very bad for us. Yeah. It's not neutral. It's bad. Right. You'd be healthier fasting, right. And obviously there are a lot of people who are stuck in that fact that the wages haven't gone up in 40 years, and they're working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, and they're struggling to get by, and they eat what they can when they can. But
yeah, and you think of it as abundance.
Yes.
A big cheeseburger, a generous helping of fries, and a 67-ounce Coca-Cola. You start to think of that as abundance. So what we need to do is to produce an idea of abundance that people respond to, and they say, well, yeah, this is more abundant than what I came to accept as the fruits of the earth.
Yeah. You mentioned that Danone got their B Corp status in only 1 year, or Dan in North America. And after Faber was dismissed, they went on to drop 97 small farms in New England. Didn't impinge on their B status at all. And so I see that that's wonderful that people are starting to think about that, but I also see it's certainly not a firewall against what I would call bad behavior, because they were replacing that with CAFOs. That's why milk is so cheap. It's because milk is being certified as organic that's coming from CAFOs, and it depresses the whole market.
Yeah, there's no, there are no magic bullets. But again, I think it's a question of what, even with the B Corp movement, it puts the discipline, it puts some discipline on these larger companies when they become a B Corp. But it's no guarantee, especially in decisions that are, in certain decisions that are made, that's going to be a good decision.
So look, you've lived a life as a business person, but also as an activist, I think, and as a very responsible human being, trying to make our planet a better place to live for everybody. What do you right now see as the acupuncture point that's the right place to put the energy? Amory Lovins described the Rocky Mountain Institute as doing institutional acupuncture and looking for the inflection points where they thought with a little bit of influence and effort, they could create a fairly big change.
Yeah. I guess I see it a little bit differently. I have friends who work at RMI, and I guess I'm more interested in how do you create a feeling or create a story that people respond to when you have something genuine that can be replicated. It's interesting when you say that, the Leopold Kohr comment about it, if something is wrong, it's too big. There's an almost yin and yang opposite insight from Dwight Eisenhower, who was the logistician of World War II, who said, whenever I can't solve a problem, I make it bigger.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Because then I can begin to see the edges of it. So I think to some extent what we need is to really face our world and to think in a very large way about what's wrong, as when we talk about the integrity of the biotic community and whether our actions tend to help or tend to hurt that. And then on the other hand, I think we need, what we've neglected is the small scale, the local. We've neglected community at the kind of stressing in the U.S. both the individual on the one hand and then the large scale activity on the other. So I don't know where the inflection points are. I do know that, if we talk a little bit in the book about, and I work with young people, and they want to know, they want to go to work for a good company, or they want to go to work in a good activity. And then, I see one is the electrification of the economy, which, RMI is all about, but it's not necessarily the only question, and there are some, the more you do, the more you learn what the problems are. Cobalt and getting rare earth materials out of the Congo, et cetera, et cetera. But electrification of the economy is important. I think that defense of democracy is really important, even though people often vote in a way that I don't like. But just the idea of democracy, it includes that idea of agency, of defending the place you live. And I think that face-to-face democracy works better than over the internet, because if you've got a human being across from you, there's less tendency to demonize. I think so many young people I run into are really interested in agriculture and shifting the kind of urban-rural divide where we've had a kind of internal colonialism of the big city over rural life. How do you change that so you don't have a kind of populist revolt of rural people that you've had all over the world, actually, in rural places against urban people who make money. Those are areas in which I think we need a lot of different activity. We need a lot of activity in finance to get away from delivering the highest possible returns to rich families to how do we finance activities that we need, where we traditionally, not a lot of people who are in the financial business know how to do that because they've been trained to do something else and they're experienced at doing something else.
These are good answers. Would you say that I'm thinking, we're actually working on developing a leadership, an organic leadership initiative, and as I listen to you, I'm struck again that perhaps one of the critical things is to develop that sense of agency, that people are so overwhelmed by the enormity of the challenges that they become depressed and they shut down. And I see it a lot. Yeah. And I actually feel some pressure not to be depressed because I'm going, but you're, what should we do? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm depressed too, and I'm overwhelmed too. But I do think it is important that we don't necessarily have we certainly don't have the power to stop Cargill. We don't. And Seth Godin generously reminded me of that in one conversation. But we do have the power to do something important.
Yeah, and we have the power to eventually make, I hate to use that word, but we do have the power to make Cargill irrelevant.
Irrelevant, that's right.
And I think that that's what we need to do. Cargill has to pursue a model that's actually consistent with what we're advocating, what we're trying to bring about.
Sure. And then Cargill won't be Cargill.
It won't
There'll
be
be
Cargill.
Something new.
Or what Emmanuel Faber was trying to do at Danone. And I'm sure there are still people at Danone trying to do that, or at least trying to be less harmful than a traditional company.
Yeah. All right. We've run our course, Vincent, but
yeah,
any last things you'd like to say?
I hate to sound optimistic, but I'm not really arguing for optimism. I'm arguing for what going again back to that Aldo Leopold line. How do we proceed? And what I see with younger people is the opportunity to take their energy and their intelligence, and they all have a lot of social skills that my generation grew up with. There are lots of things that can be done. Most of them are not going to make you rich, but they are going to create that sense of the possible for somebody else. Patagonia, that is now viewed, I think Axios Harris poll said we were the most trusted company in the United States. Now, take that with a grain of salt, because a couple of years ago it was Clorox. But I think that says something about that's something.
Yeah.
And we were the 6th most trusted company among Republicans. That I was really proud of, because that means they're forgiving us.
All right. Vincent Stanley, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.
All right.
All right.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. Our movement is growing because you're subscribing and sharing these podcasts with your friends. So keep it up and leave us a rating and a review as well so that others can find us. You can find a video version of this interview on our newly designed website, realorganicproject.org, or on our YouTube channel. And you can join us every Thursday for a new episode featuring voices from the organic movement. See you next time.